So I'm Mark Beaumont. I'm 37, and I've spent the last 15 years taking on firsts and fastest expeditions around the planet that have taken me to about 130 countries. I started when I was 12 years old, I guess, when I had the ambition to cycle from Land's End to John O'Groats. But my mum pointed out that I should probably try something smaller first because I'd not really cycled off the farm before. So I was encouraged and supported to do a wee ride across Scotland, which was like 145 miles over 3 days, and raise some money for some local charities. And that kind of piqued my interest in not just the journey, but also the planning of it, and the logistics, and just the escape on the bike. Like, I've always loved bike riding, not just because not really to be a racer, but just because where the bike can take you. And yeah, by the time I was 15, I was going Land's End, John O'Groats. By the time I was leaving school, I was pedaling across Europe. And by the time I was graduating at the age of 22, I was ready to cycle around the world.
How did your parents allow you to do this? Because you cycled from the very top of Scotland to the very bottom of England when you were a child, right?
Yeah, I mean, my mum in particular has always been hugely supportive. When I graduated from basically the age of like 22 through till 35, my mum worked with me full time. Like, she was one of my core team. And then as a kid, she was hugely supportive. I've got two daughters now, a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old, and I can't imagine the day where, I work for them on their business. Like, it's an amazing thought to how your kids grow up and take on these responsibilities. But I was homeschooled. So my mum homeschooled myself and my two sisters until we were 12. And growing up in the foothills of the Highlands in Scotland and Perthshire, I just had extraordinary freedoms. I probably spent an hour or two around the kitchen table doing the subjects, and the rest of the time was working on the farm. We had 60 goats to milk, we had 200 laying hens to collect the eggs from, we had 13 horses to ride and muck out and sort. We had a farm to run. So I spent my entire sort of the first 10, 12 years of my life just outdoors, being adventurous, working on a farm. I wasn't, I wasn't doing it in like in a planned manner. It wasn't like I was part of the scouts, or it wasn't like I was doing any sort of adventure because this is adventure time. I was just being a kid on a farm, and I didn't go to school, and I didn't know what a playground was. So I just had extraordinary freedom.
And then you cycled the world, right? You circumnavigated the whole world in 78 days, 14 hours. How did that come about? How do you have the motivation to do something that big?
So the circumnavigation world record, I mean, when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, I watched Ellen MacArthur sail around the world. And I thought, why is the cycling record for exactly the same thing? How fast can you get around the planet? Why is it not the most coveted professional record in the book? The sailing record, the single, the solo, unsupported around the world is the biggest prize out there. And yet in cycling, not that many people had tried it.
Mm-hmm.
So back in 2006, 2007, when I first spotted that opportunity, the record stood at 276 days back then. And it wasn't thinking I was the world's best bike rider. I just thought, look, it's just not been done properly. It's crazy. It's the world. And yet nobody's really had a crack at it. So the first time I cycled around the world, I took a couple of months off that record and did it unsupported in a time of like 194 days. That was a big BBC documentary. It kind of launched my career. And I watched with awe and with interest as people over the decade since then took it to another level, went faster and faster, took greater degrees of support. It became like an ultralight, super competitive thing. Like when I first went for it, it was like a trekking record. It was more about where am I going to sleep each night and where am I going to find my next meal, as opposed to like actually, being a racer. But that changed in the last 10, 15 years. And it's extraordinary how it's now, a super competitive, it's almost like, it's the real cutting edge of endurance racing. The circumnavigation is exactly where it should be. It is how fast you can get around the planet. And it's, Jenny Graham, the female round the world record holder, myself, we've really taken massive strides to make that, as, next level as possible. You can't just fall out of bed now and break the record. When I first went for it back in 2007, a lot of people could have gone for that. Now, yeah, you need a very professional team, bigger budget. Like, you need to really know what you're doing. You need to have done some major rides before taking that on. But your question was about motivation. I've just always loved that concept. How fast can you get around the planet? You know, the romantic side of it. You know, Around the World in 80 Days was a 1873 fiction book around, you know, Phileas Fogg and you know, whether it's Michael Palin or Disney, you know, Around the World in 80 Days means something to people. And that concept had always, well, certainly for the last 5 years, inspired me. It's like, is that actually possible? Can you get yourself around the planet in less than 80 days? But there was no reference point. Nobody had done anything close to that. I took the record from 123 days down to 78. And that blew people's mind.
Ranulph Fiennes once said that the hardest part of an expedition was finding the sponsors and the funding. How did you go about doing that?
It's extraordinarily hard. I think the more successful you are, the more expensive your projects get. So it doesn't get any easier because you're trying to sort of, you know, every time your level of ambition grows. I remember the first time I cycled around the world, it cost £25,000, and that seemed like an impossible task. I was like, oh my goodness, how am I ever going to raise 25 grand? It took me half a year to do that as a student. You know, whereas my last project, you know, in cash and in kind, cost £1 million, and you know, the best part of 40 people worked on it. So raising £1 million for a project like that 15 years into my career is equally as difficult as raising 25 grand when I started. It's just the scale of the ambition has got bigger. So the mountain you're climbing gets bigger. But the task doesn't change. And most expeditions, from my experience, never get to the start line. So most people are good at what they say they can do, you know, be that rowing an ocean or climbing a mountain or, you know, whatever it is. But the reality is, you know, most people underestimate how hard it is to build the funding, you know, get the right team around you, build a profile around it so it's worth backing. So most of these great athletes and adventurers just never get started. And I know that because I've spent the last 15 years talking to them.
How would you overcome naysayers and family members saying that it's impossible, saying that you can't do it?
I mean, I've spent my entire career trying to do stuff that's not been done before, either first or fastest. I've never been a nomadic traveler. So by definition, I'm doing stuff which is impossible simply because it's not been done before. So you're always faced from people saying, are you sure? And actually, it's often people who are closest to you, as in like family and friends, who doubt you the most. And they don't doubt you because they don't trust you. They doubt you because they don't want to see you failing. Like, they almost care too much. So I always think, you know, when it comes to parents and friends, and you've got to be very careful about what attitudes and feedback you surround yourself to, because those people who are really invested in your success and don't want to see you fail, you know, their insecurities and their worries on your behalf can be a real drag, a real brake on progress. And they don't mean it. All they mean is love and support and care, but actually it manifests itself in doubt. And you know, that's got to be really carefully managed. So I trust people who are friends but from very different walks of life. They sort of share that entrepreneurial mindset. They're people who are equally ambitious, but they're not tied to my success. You know, if I ask my wife or sometimes even my mum or my close friends for advice, they care too much. They're too close. You know, I need people who, whether I succeed or fail, their own journeys are completely separate to mine. Their opinion and support is completely objective. And you need to have that wise counsel around you. When you have bad days, when you have insecurities, when you have real sort of mental blips, you need to have people you can turn to who are not fundamentally invested in the success of what you're doing, but are your friends and, you know, your backers.
Mm-hmm. So what are you doing now during quarantine?
Well, I normally spend a huge amount of my life out there filming projects. I was meant to be going to America to do Race Across America in June, just back before the lockdown, for making a big film in Chile. But I'm taking this time to write a book about endurance and starting a podcast series on the same topic. The podcast series will kind of take care of itself because I'll be interviewing so many people on the subject of endurance to be woven into the book, I thought, well, I might as well interview them and put them out as a series. So I never would have had time to write that book or have those conversations if I'd been doing my normal work. So there's a big silver lining. That'll be out by the end of the year. Really enjoying time with the kids. I live in Edinburgh, and my 6-year-old's enjoying her bicycle. So every day I go for a run, she cycles with me, and we've got this little project by the time she goes back to school in August to have run and cycled together every single street in Edinburgh. I've mapped it out, and Edinburgh as a city is 80 10K runs.
Okay.
So today was day 33.
Final question. What is your next big project? You know, what's next for Mark Beaumont?
There's nothing bigger than cycling around the world. That was very much my Everest. So I'm very happy to say that my biggest projects are behind me in that sense. But I've never entered a race. I've never entered a traditional race where I'm, on the start line with a field around me. I've always gone out there and taken on these records sort of in isolation. So what I'd like to spend the next 2-3 years doing is taking on some of the most iconic endurance adventure events in the planet, running, cycling, mountain biking, all sorts of stuff. I've always had that bucket list, but I've just never prioritized it because I've been doing my own thing in the expedition world. So as a bit of sort of a passion project as much as anything else, I'd like to take on the likes of the Cape Epic, Race Across America, and others, just for that experience of taking my skill set and the things I love about adventure sports, but into a race format as opposed to just out there, racing myself on the clock.